Start recording. It says it's recording. I don't see any error messages, so maybe we're going to be doing better this time. Okay, so we're going to make a parallax background. This isn't too hard, but there's a couple of settings that you just have to be careful about. So I'm going to start by making the art. But one thing that I'm going to tell you before I start making the art is I already know what the size of my game window is. I know that it's 1024 by 512. And so if your game window is a different size, you should just make sure that you know what size it is. And if you want it to be a different size, you can. If you like that size, that's fine. But it's important for creating the graphics. When we're making the background, we want our background obviously to fill up the whole game window. And so if our game window, if we know it's 1024 by 512, we can use that as the size. But if it's bigger than that and our background is too small, then it's going to create problems. You're going to see a border around the outside of the background, which we don't want. You can always make the art bigger later if it doesn't fit, or if you make your game bigger. But before you start, you want to know how big you're working with. And then to create a parallax background, we actually want to like a little bit of space on the top and the bottom. It kind of depends on what you're doing. You can fit it exactly and it'll work, but I like to put a little space on the top and the bottom for a side-scrolling platformer. You wouldn't really use a background like this for an RPG style game. So if that's what you're interested in making, I wouldn't worry about this. But for a platformer, you are going to probably want a background, and you'll probably want more space top and bottom as you're moving across, depending on what style it is. If you're doing something that's more, vertically oriented, then you'll want more space on the edges. But I'm just going to go through it, and hopefully I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I do it. But anyway, let's get into making the art to get started. So I'm going to go to Piskel. And so what I'm going to do is make my background. I'm going to do, I don't want to do, what I'm going to do is scale it up a little bit, because that way I don't have to add as much detail, and I think it'll look okay. But I am going to make it bigger. So my project is 1024 by 1024. So I'm going to make it half of that, or it's 1024 by 512, but I'm going to go with 1024. So, but I'm going to do 1024, and I'm going to do half of that, which is 512. And then I'm going to scale it when I export it. Okay, so I'm doing 512 as the width and height, and I'm going to click resize here. And there you see my grid. That's actually kind of useful here. I'm going to draw a little outline of where my game window really is to help me when I draw the rest of it. So I'm going to get the stroke tool. And if I zoom all the way out, basically my game window is twice as big as it is wide. And we can look here and we see there's one, two, oh, whoops, let me get the pen tool. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is my drawing tool is being weird. 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I have 8 rows and I have 8 columns. And so my game, this is like, what I'm going to do is basically like this part is going to be the top, and this part is going to be the bottom, and this middle part is going to be my actual game window. So I'm just going to draw a line, a big line. Actually, let's draw a square and fill it in. So I'm going to draw a big square. And it doesn't have to be super accurate, but I just want to have a general sense of where the game window is. And then I'm going to...
Your stream is off right now.
Oh, whoops. Sorry.
Appreciate it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for interrupting me. Okay, sorry about that. So let me just go through that again real quick. So I opened up Piskel, and I changed the size. So I went to resize here, and I did 512 by 512. As I mentioned, it's half of the width of my game. And so that means I have this little grid. I could turn this grid on and off. Was somebody talking? Oh, okay. I thought I heard something. Okay, so I have the grid on. Francis, I think you need to mute. What? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm gonna draw a square for where my game window is, which is like the middle 4 boxes, basically, right here. I'm just gonna fill that in. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just gives me an area to see where my game window is. So it's very subtle, but I can see this sort of black square here. And what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna make something really simple, is just like a couple mountains. And I'm going to make one layer that's like a full background, and then I'm going to put a layer in front of it that has some transparency so I can layer them on top of each other. So for the full background, I'm going to get my pen tool. I'm going to make some mountains, so I'm going to get like a green color, something like that, and just like draw some mountains. Kind of bad, but whatever. It's good enough for an example. So then I'll fill in the bottom green, and I'll fill in the top blue for the sky. Okay, so that's my really wacky background. And then I'm gonna have like a little front layer. And so I'm gonna make another mountain range, but I'll make it a different color so we can see it. So I'm gonna get the pen tool again and just do a different green, something like that. And I'll just offset it a little bit. So actually, let me start over here, something like that. Okay, and so I'm gonna fill in the bottom of this one, but not the top, so I can layer these on top of each other. And you could really do as many of these layers as you want. And I feel like they're not different enough, so I'm gonna make this green darker. Okay, I think that'll stand out. That'll be different enough. Okay, so that's the easy part. Obviously, you could make a more detailed background. I'm just doing this quickly to save time. But here's the tricky part. So we want this background to be seamless. I'm going to turn off the onion skin for a second and go up here. And I'm going to turn off the grid. Well, actually, we can leave the grid on. That's fine. So in order to make a seamless background, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool, the move tool, and I'm going to use the Alt key. And you see it there, it says if I hold the Alt key, it's going to wrap around the canvas borders. And then I also need to hold the Control key to apply it to all frames so that it does the same thing to both of my layers. I mean, I actually could do it to each one individually since they're not connected, but that's not how I'm going to do it. So with the Move tool, if I just move it, some of the art disappears. That's not what I want. I'm going to undo. If I hold Alt and I move it, see what happens? It wraps around the canvas, and it does it both height-wise and vertical-wise. And what this is going to let me do is create a seamless background so that as the background repeats, the new background will come in, and I'll basically get an infinite background from one drawing. So as I mentioned again, I'm going to hit Alt and Control at the same time. You could do this one by one, but I'm just going to do it to both at the same time. So I'm holding Control and Alt on my keyboard, and I'm dragging this around. And all I really need to do is make sure is that I don't have too much green at the top or blue at the bottom. Doesn't matter if there's a little bit. It's hard to get it exactly perfect, but we're probably not going to see that in the actual game. But it's close enough here. So now I'm going to let it go there. It looked like it didn't do my second frame, so maybe I didn't hold them both. Oh, no. Control Shift. Sorry. Control is layers. Shift is frame. So I need to hold Alt and Shift at the same time. So I'm holding Alt and Shift. I'm going to try it again. And let's try to get it right. I'm going to let go. So now what I want to do, I'm just going to zoom in on this area where you can see that there's an obvious, like, split between the frames. And I'm just going to fill this part in. So I'm going to take my pencil and choose the blue color and just draw over this part. Use my stylus. So all I'm doing is just making this part seamless. I'm getting rid of the seam here. And you can do this however you want, as long as it matches up. So let's get the green back and just fill this in. Okay, so that looks good enough. It's gonna look it's gonna look kind of weird, but I'm just gonna do this quickly so we don't have a ton of time here. Okay, so now I'm gonna go over here, and I can't tell if it didn't do this one or if I just got the seam really close. I honestly don't know, so I'm gonna do it over here just to be sure. So I'm gonna get my move tool again, and this time I'm just gonna hit Alt to wrap. I'm not gonna hit Shift. And I think I actually just like drew this one really well. I think I just happened to get it at like the right part because I don't really see any seams unless I'm like nuts right now. Let's turn off the grid. I think I just like drew this really on point unless I'm missing something. Anyway, okay, that looks good enough. Okay, so now we've got our two layers. Let's delete our outline back here. Got our two background layers. You can do as many layers you want. I'm just going to do two for this example. So I'm going to save the art. I should have saved this at the beginning, but I'm going to go here and click Save As and go to my desktop, go into my game, go to Art, go to Scenery, and let's call this background. And save. And I can save this as a sprite sheet and then just divide up the sprites in the background. So this is saved now. So now I can go to export and go to PNG, and sprite sheet is fine. As I mentioned, I'm going to scale this up by 2. And so there we see the 1024, which is what I need for my level or for my scene. So I'm going to download my sprite sheet, and there it goes into, so this one is desktop. Go to my game, go into the game itself, go to the sprites, and I'm just going to save it here under background. I only have one background, so if you have a lot of backgrounds, you might want to, put like background underscore level 2 or something like that. But I'm just going to work with one background for now. So I'm going to click save there. And so now I'm done with the art. I'm ready to go build my Parallax background. So I'm going to leave here. And so now I'm going to go over to Godot and open up my game. So in the last class, I was kind of going over making tile sets, and I messed up one of the tile sets, but I edited in the rest of the video a part where I did it correctly. So yeah, that video is on the MMP 270 channel, the last one here. So if you go to the end, you'll see where I set it up correctly, but I also put a download in there. So you can actually download the tile sets, and if you put the tile sets in your own program, it'll look like this here. I made a separate folder for the 270 tile sets. And all you have to do to make sure this works is if in your sprites, you have to make sure that you have the image named like this, scenery underscore auto tile 3x3. And there's a platformer and an RPG style in there. So you can use those if you don't want to set them up on your own, but I go over how to set them up in the video. And I'm going to use one of them for this example. So yeah, there's a link to that in the video. There's also a link under, where is it? In labs, way down here, this tile set thing. So I'll link here as well in this video. Anyway, so in that video, I made like a little auto tile platform scene that kind of looks like this. I'll use this as the basis for the next scene for adding the background. So I'm just going to duplicate this real quick. So this is my background example. And for this one, I'm just going to take out the scenery so I don't have to deal with that. So let's delete the scenery. And I'm going to take out this other tile map that I'm not using. And so I just have this tile map here, which is based on the platformer style. So if I run this scene, you'll see that my player kind of jumps, can walk on the tile map and can jump around. And the jump speed is probably a little bit too high, but so I'm going to build this out a little bit, but then I'm going to fit in the background. Although now that I'm thinking about it, I would probably want this to be transparent with the background. Okay, so I'm just going to fill this out a little bit. And let's put some tiles over here. And over here for the player to walk around on. And yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, it would make way more sense if I had these as transparent. Maybe I'll do that later. But anyway, let's turn the jump force down a little bit. And let's see if we can go across here. Oops. Okay, so this will be good enough to demonstrate the parallax background, although it's going to look kind of weird with these blue blocks in the front. But I'll fix that later. So we're going to make our parallax background now. So I'm going to stop this one. And I'm going to add in a background layer. So the background layer is like its own rendering layer. So it kind of adds like a second canvas to what's already happening in the game. So I'm going to go to the main node of the scene. And let's call this background scene. And I'm going to click the plus button. And I'm just going to look for parallax background. So there's two components here when I type in parallax background and parallax layer. We're going to use both of these, but I'm going to start with the parallax background. So there's my parallax background. Let's move it up a little bit here. And so when we look in here, there's some different settings. We're going to have to play with these a little bit, but for now I'm going to leave most of these the same. One setting you can see in here is the layer value is like -100, so that makes sure it's in the background. But if you wanted to change that, you actually could. So this is like a separate layer from our main game layer. Okay, so next we're going to add in our parallax layer. So I'm going to click on the parallax background and click add child node and add a layer. And I'm going to build out the whole first layer and then duplicate it. So I'm not going to create two copies of the layer. So I just have my first parallax layer. And under here, I have this motion property, which is how you change how the background moves. And so there's a few things under here that will change in a minute. But first, let's add our image. So I'm going to click on the parallax layer. And now I'm going to add in a sprite to hold in our background image. So I'm just going to choose the sprites. And here's where we're going to put in our first layer of our background. So I'll click on the empty texture and go to load and go into sprites. And here's my background sprite. So I'm going to open that up and we're going to see the entire background. That's obviously not what we want. Oh, and it's in front because I turned this node into a Y sort, but that's not actually what I want in a platformer scene. So let's change this node back to a node 2D. There we go. So now we can see our player. Our player is also like the same color as the background. Should have thought about that, but we can maybe change the color a little bit. Let's see. Okay, we can make it a little darker, so the player will stand out a little bit more. Anyway, so there's our background, but we have both images. We don't want both images on this layer. So what I'll do is inside the sprite, under the sprite properties, under animation, we just set the vertical frames. There's 2 frames in this sprite sheet. So when I turn vertical frames to 2, now we just get our first layer. So that looks pretty good. So now we just have to set up the parallax style. So I'm going to click on the parallax layer again, and look, there's a few things in here. The motion scale is 1 on X and 1 on Y, and that determines how the background moves with the game. And so when it's 1 and 1, it just moves at the same rates. So when I play the game, you can see the background just moves at the exact same rate as everything else in my game. So that's not really what we want. But if we do 0 and 0, now if I play the game, the background's not going to move at all. So see, the background is just stuck in the background. And if you just have one image, that's really all you kind of need for the background. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So when the scale is 0 on X and 0 on Y, that means it's not going to move at all. But we want it to move a little bit just to give this illusion of motion. So I'm going to change the X scale to like 0.25. So it's 25% of the main camera motion. And so now it's kind of hard to tell, but the background is moving. I keep just falling off this platform. The background is moving at a slower rate than the rest of the game. And eventually we get to the end of the background. Okay, so we're going to fix that in a second. But we can see that the background is moving slow. The Y, I could leave at 0, so it just doesn't move at all. But since I have a little room on the Y, I can set the Y to like maybe 0.1. So it's only 10% of the motion. And I just have to test when I jump that I don't leave the visible background. So as long as I can't jump up past the visible background, then I'm not worried about that Y value. And eventually I will be able to fall, but see, if I fall too far, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe the character just died, but I haven't implemented that yet. But yeah, so we don't see the end of the background either. So 0.1 works there. Depending on how much room you have in the horizontal range, you may have to play with that. But I have a decent amount of room up and down. So now we have to set it up so that it repeats. So I'm going to set the scale back to 1 for a second so that it's easier to test. So when the scale's at 1, as soon as I get to this second platform, we see the edge here. And we don't want that. We want our background to repeat. So the way we do that is using this mirroring setting. So I just want to mirror based on the size of my window, which is 1024, which happens to be the size of my art as well. So now when we play this, it should repeat. Okay, so now we have this repeating background that just goes forever. And so if we slow it down again, the nice thing here is now it doesn't repeat as often. So it's not going to be as obvious that our background is just repeating forever. It's the same art. Okay, one thing I want to test is if I go the other way, does it also repeat? Because sometimes it looks okay. I need more platforms over here. So let's grab my tile map and get rid of some of these platforms. Okay, let's save this. Okay, so I want to make sure that it repeats both ways, if my character can move both ways. So that looks pretty good. So let's duplicate this layer and add our next layer. So I'm just going to grab the whole layer and hit Control D to duplicate. And now I'm just going to take this sprite, and I'm not even going to change the texture because it already has this the sprite sheet here, I'm just going to go to animation. B-frames is still 2. I'm just going to change the frame that we're on. So I'm going to go to frame 1. Now we have our background, our second layer of mountains. And one thing I might want to change here is the motion. So if I change the scale here, maybe this is a little closer, so the motion is a little faster. I'll do like 0.3. Now that layer is going to move a little bit faster than my back layer. And so this creates this kind of nice sense of these layers in the background of my scene. So I get a lot more sort of like depth by offsetting this scale a little bit. If I did it too much, like let's say I do like 75%, now it's going to look, it might look okay. Let's see what happens. So now those mountains that are closer to me move a lot faster. So, you know, it looks a little less realistic, I guess. I don't know. Let's try like 0.4. I think that'll be good. Okay. Yeah, it's good enough. So yeah, so that's how I do a parallax background. Again, you can add lots of layers. You can do different things with it, but that's kind of the basics. And then, yeah, I have this goofy thing where I have the blue color on my platforms. That's actually pretty easy to fix. I just need to make that transparent. Let's just do that real quick, because I can always make the background blue on the other scene. So let's do that. That's probably a better way to do this anyway. So I just have to go to my sprite for this auto tile. So let's go to show in file manager. And so I just have to remove the blue from here, make it transparent. So let's open that up in Piskel. You could do this in anything really. So I'm going to go to Piskel. I'm just going to do this quick. I'm going to drag this in here. Import a single image. Okay. And so if I just take the bucket and I right click on the blue areas, that's going to make them transparent because the default color, second color is transparent. If I do that and then export it again, don't want to scale it up. As long as I keep this name the same, it should just replace it in Godot. So let's see if that worked. Let's go back to Godot. There we go. So now we have some like more obvious glitches, but we don't have that background, so it's going to look a little bit nicer. So yeah, that looks a lot better. And let's get rid of those glitches real quick since we've got it open. Let's turn on the grid. And let's see, where are those glitches? So there's one there. It might be kind of hard to find these actually. That's probably one. I'll do this later. We don't need to do this right now. So I'm just going to put that down here. But anyway, once I fix those, this would look a lot better. Okay. So now I'm going to quickly go over submitting this assignment. Okay, so for the scenery assignment, as I mentioned, you just have to create a setting for your scene with a combination of the stuff that we've gone over. So we've gone over just basic sprites, gone over tile maps, we've gone over backgrounds. So you don't have to use all of those components, but you should have a scene where there's no like defaults. There's no like gray background, basically. So for this scene, I'm going to document this. So I'm going to play this scene. And so we can see here, I've got the background and I've got the platforms. Let's go over here. Whoops. Let's go over here a little bit where we see the platforms. And so I'm just going to document this. I'm going to hit Windows G for my Xbox game bar. And I'm going to hit the capture button. Okay, so there's my first image. And so you just need as many images as shows the scenery that you worked on. So if that's everything you did, that's fine. But I also made the other scenery scene, so I'm going to go there. So I'm going to go to my, where did I have this? My RPG. Okay, so this is the RPG version of my scene. And now that I have this as transparent, oh, I have this, there is still some blue in here. I wonder where that is. I didn't get the whole thing. Oh, whoops. Okay. I didn't get everything. Okay, let's export that again. Oops. Okay, you have to make sure to replace the original or it's not going to get replaced. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to change the background so it's not gray, but I don't really need to fill everything in with water actually. So I'm going to go to project settings, and go to window, and not here. Okay, let's look for background. Oh, huh. I thought this was in the window. Okay, let's Google Godot set background color. Project settings render. Okay. Rend. Okay, there we go. Environment default clear color. So let's make that like blue. There we go. Now we've got water again. Okay, so now I've got my scenery back. And so I had a bunch of different scenery in here. I had my little signs, I had my trees, and I had my tile map. So let's document this as well. So I'm gonna hit Command G, or sorry, Windows G, and capture another image. Okay, so I've got my documentation. I've captured the images. And so now I'm ready to post my assignment on the OpenLab. So I'm going to go back to the OpenLab. I have to make sure I'm logged in. I hit the plus to add a new post. And I want to choose a category first. So this is a scenery. So let's do scenery. I also did the backgrounds and I did the tiles. So I'm just going to tag everything that I did on here. And so now I'm going to say scenery. And I'm going to put my images in here. So I'm going to click on the plus block and add a new image. And if I go to my videos, I go to my captures folder. Let's see, here's my background. And so I'll just put a little description here, Parallax background with platformer tile sets. And then I'll put my second image, which is here. And so this is scenic elements and RPG tile set. And so that's my documentation of what it looks like in the game, but I also want to make sure to include the sprites I used. So I'm going to hit the plus button again, go back to image, go to upload. And so now I'm going to go to my desktop, go to my game, and go to the sprites and just add all the sprites that I use. So here's my background. I'm going to hold shift and it only let me does one actually. So I'll start with the parallax background. Parallax background, right sheet. Okay. Then I'm going to do another image of my tile set. So auto tiles. And then almost done, I'm going to add a gallery of my other scenery. So gallery, upload, and so I've got my bird and my sign. Oh, and I don't have my tree in here because it's like one of the defaults. But if you have another scenery element, just put it in there. And let's turn off. It's really annoying to edit the gallery. Okay. I don't want to crop images. And so this is my bird sprite sheet. And this is my sign. Okay, so there's kind of a lot of steps, but depending on how much scenery you put in, you just want to capture and document everything that you worked on. So let's preview this post. Okay, everything looks good. And so now I'm going to publish. And that's it. So once you publish, it'll be on the Open Lab, and we'll be able to take a look at it. Okay, so that's it for that bit.